Hello, McDude here. In our last episode, we set three spacecraft into a lunar orbit with the idea that at least one of them should be able to make a successful landing. Now, if I had a grand plan, I would try to set all three down at the Neil Armstrong Memorial. But I won't lie to you, I thought about it. I went to the forums, I did the research, and I soon realized that it's hard enough just getting a lander down to the ground. Especially since I don't know the elevations until it's too late. Both of my last landers crashed at an elevation of one at 1,200 meters. I think the other one was around just over 1,200, maybe 1,400 meters. Also, I don't seem to be able to figure out coordinates on the Mun. So even though I have the coordinates for the Neil Armstrong Memorial, I don't really know how to get there. But anyway, we're gonna attempt our first landing here. Bob Kerman is boldly flying the Ares 14 lander, and this was the spacecraft that's different from the others. It was the very unstable spacecraft trying to get out of orbit. It also features a very different lander with a small fuel tank and two instead of one of the RCS tanks. As I look at these tanks, I look at resources, and one of the problems is I'm almost out of fuel on this one, and this spacecraft is very top heavy because I have a fair amount of RCS fuel left over. So I've got, with the two tanks up top, with a fair amount of fuel, and the main tank almost empty. This is a very top-heavy spacecraft, so I'm a little worried about it tipping over. But or at least I was. But now I'm more worried about running out of fuel. However, I don't really have the ability to get back into orbit at this point. It's sort of a point of no return. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to set this top-heavy spacecraft down. I've learned a little bit about bleeding off lateral velocity. Basically, I had made the mistake in the past of trying to ride the retrograde down, when in fact, and I just ran out of fuel. When in fact, what I should have been doing, was leading the retrograde. That appears to be the key to killing off one's lateral velocity before landing. And I want to thank Bob Kerman for helping me figure that out. Next up, Jebediah Kerman and the Ares 5B lunar lander are going to attempt their shot at landing at the Mun. We're at an altitude of 33,000 meters and making final preparations. I've lined up the retrograde on the nav ball, and this time I'm going to try to lead the retrograde in order to kill off all my lateral velocity before landing, which is something I have not been very good at so far. So I'm making constant adjustments. We do a burn here, let the retrograde catch up to me, and then I go ahead and I move up a little bit, do another burn, let the retrograde catch up to that. And that seems to be the best way to kill off my lateral velocity in preparation. As you can see, the retrograde climbing there is either in preparation for a landing. This entire video, all three attempts, is actually sped up at double speed. It's not sped up in game. I'm not using time warp within game. But in post-production, I went ahead and sped the whole thing up. I was kind of torn. I didn't want to put out a 35-minute video. I didn't think a lot of people want to sit through that. 17 minutes seemed to make a lot more sense. I thought it would be a lot more palatable for the impatient. And besides, double speed doesn't seem to degrade the quality that much. You still get a good idea as to what's going on. We've just about got the retrograde up. Just about killed off all of our lateral velocity, I believe. Assuming I'm understanding the concept properly. There's a dial right next to the altimeter that I don't quite understand. That I think is connected to lateral velocity, but I'm not really sure. So anyway, we continue our descent. We're at 18,000 meters. Jebediah is he's okay. He's calm. And I've slowed everything down to about 35 meters, 50 meters per second and descending. And one of my challenges has been to keep the descent below 50 meters per second. Trying to do this has resulted in a lot of small burns. As you can see, I'm constantly checking. I seem to have killed off my lateral velocity. And we continue our descent. Constantly making adjustments, constantly trying to keep the descent at less than 50 meters per second. And the reason why is I don't want to come in too fast. I'm beginning to wonder, like I said in our last episode, I'm beginning to wonder about the wisdom of these tall rockets. Problem being that I'm wondering if they're A, top heavy, since I have these RCS tanks at the top, and then and B, if they're just too tall, if they're just unstable. You'll notice that I increase power. The retrograde starts to slide away from the from beneath me, but my rate of descent actually goes up rather quickly. Every time I take the power off, the rate of descent goes up rather quickly, which is making me think that I've just got too much mass in this spacecraft. I'm not really certain, but anyway, regardless, we continue our descent. I'm at 7,400 meters. 7,200 meters. We're descending very quickly. Every time I apply power, the retrograde goes away. Now I really need to figure out what that dial next to the altimeter means. Because I've been relying on the thing, the gauge at the top of the nav ball to tell me how fast I'm going. But that's not lateral velocity. At some point during descent, after accelerating enough times, the spacecraft begins to experience what I would call lateral drift. That is, I begin to drift sideways. And I'm not sure what caused that to happen. It's not yet. At 3,000 meters, I'm still okay. About here, you see just a little bit. And that might have something to do with the retrograde sliding off the way it does. Jebediah seems calm. Normally the Kerbals freak out as a way of telling me something's going wrong. Jebediah seems to take a long time to do that. Here is where you see the lateral drift really kick in. I'm at 2,000 meters ascending. Ground level usually shows up sometime between 1,200 and 1,400 meters. But you can see a fair amount of ground scatter. And I really... this isn't even lateral drift anymore. I'm just flying sideways. And I know that. I keep climbing to get away from it. I get into a vicious cycle. Here's the shadow. But I don't have a way of getting above it. So I just keep climbing away from it to accidentally make contact. SAS kicks in. With RCS going crazy, SAS probably should have been turned off at this point. Now Jebediah tells me something's gone wrong. And after the crash, we roll around a few times. The nav ball goes crazy, telling me something's wrong, which of course it's too late. I can kind of figure that out now. Jeb keeps laughing. He doesn't realize the type of situation he's in. But regardless, I go ahead, we EVA, and here we go. The first Kerbal to set down the surface of the moon. And we look around and see our legs off in the distance, our landing legs that we should be sitting on, but we're not. And we look around a few times, look at this desolate desert that we're stranded in. As Jebediah and the engineers at Mission Control ponder his situation and how to bring him back, the decision was made to order Bill Kerman and the Ares 18 spacecraft to attempt to descend to the moon's surface. And with a better knowledge of orbital mechanics and how to control the retrograde, we begin our descent. You'll notice that Bill goes back and forth between screaming and smiling. I'm not really sure why that is. Maybe Bill's becoming bipolar from spending too much time in space. But regardless, we continue to lead the retrograde down. Killing off our lateral velocity the entire way. And we're making pretty good progress. At 8,000 meters, we're able to bring our descent from 70 meters per second down to about 25 rather quickly, which is really not a good sign, because when I'm able to make that much progress, it usually means that I'm at some point, well, I just have to maintain that progress the entire way, and that's been the problem, has been maintaining a steady descent. But nonetheless, we've killed off all of our lateral velocity at this point. At least I believe we have. The challenge is keeping our descent speed reasonable, below 50 meters per second. At 2,200 meters, 30 meters per second, it's looking pretty good. But unfortunately, we've developed a little bit of lateral drift. You can see this spacecraft drifting against the backdrop. Ground scatter starts to show up. And I now end up with the same vicious cycle as I did last time as I get close to the ground. And this time, the elevation is a lot higher than last time. And so I try to stay above, and then disaster strikes. But no, I'm not going to let it happen this time. Not again. We go full throttle, firewall the engines, and just get the fuck out of Dodge. we start climbing as fast as we can, and of course Bill's freaking out. Hang on, Bill. I ain't gonna let anything happen to you. We're gonna get it. We're gonna get you out of here. Once the panic subsides, I go ahead and I create a maneuver node to put Bill back in orbit around the Mun. After setting up our maneuver node, we go ahead and I start flipping the spacecraft around towards the maneuver vector on the nav ball. Organize things. I pull the spacecraft up to the maneuver vector. Go ahead and close up the landing gear, or what landing gear we have left. Time warp up a little bit to our apoapsis, 64,000 meters, where the maneuver is to be executed. Then fire up the engines. And about this time I've become very aware of our fuel situation. I'm very concerned about how little fuel we have left. I'm able to get the spacecraft successfully into orbit. 23,000 meter periapsis with a 69,000 meter apoapsis. My next concern is to try to bring Bill Kerman and the stricken Ares spacecraft home on its limited fuel supply. I thank you for watching, and please light up that like button and subscribe, because in our next episode we're going to bring Bill Kerman home.